Today we're going to learn Shekalim Daf Yud Gimel. This is the daf for the 7th day of Pesach, Shabbat. We're going to start from the bottom of Yud Bet and Yud Bet. We saw in the last class that Rabbi Elazar said, Yimachlu me'oto amin. If somebody designates all of their money and they say, I'm putting this toward the temple. So if there are items like animals, then they have to be sacrificed. If there are animals like birds and wine and oil that can go on the altar, then you sell them for the same type of item for someone which means you sell them to someone who's going to bring that item on the mizbeach, because anything that can go on the altar has to go on the altar. In other words, it can't be used for anything else, but it's only sanctified kedushat damim, only its value. And that's why you can sell it. You don't have to wait till it gets redeemed, or it could be redeemed, like gets a blemish or something. There's no such law like that. He holds that it only is sanctified for its value. So to which we had seen, what's his reason? And he basically says that any offering has to go automatically. Any kind of thing you sanctify is automatically an ola, but this can't go as an ola because you can only bring a behema as a voluntary ola offering. Even though there is such a thing as an ola that comes with a bird, you can only bring an ola from a voluntary offering of it can only be an animal. Therefore, you have to redeem it. And then again, I forgot to say this point, when you sell it, you take that money from the sale and you buy korbanot ola from it. Because again, every animal that can go on the altar, we assume that you meant to do a korban ola. So now, at the end of the daf, we had Rabbi Yomi, Rabbi Bun, Barchia, having Yatvin Va'amrin, Taman Amar, Rabbi Yochanan, Tami, de Rabbi Shimon. He brought a reason for Rabbi Shimon, who said, Sheken keva ba'of kshera lavo ola, v'cha amar hachin. He's saying, this is a question, v'cha amar hachin, and this is what you're saying here. He said, when it comes to and there was a machloket about what Rabbi Shimon held. Soon we're going to see the other opinion. But Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Yochanan, held, or according to this other interpretation, we saw Shimon held, and Rabbi Yochanan is going to explain why, that if you take a female animal and designate it for a korban ola, which can't be because an ola is only brought from male, since there's a type of ola that can be brought by female, there is such a thing, which is a bird offering. Therefore, we're going to say that this has kedushat damim to it. The female one is sanctified kedushat damim, even though, now this is the strange part. It's all based on, and I'm sorry, it's kedushat haguf. I said the wrong thing. That's really important. It's valued as kedushat haguf, which means it in itself is sanctified, which the halacha there that Rabbi Shimon said, you can see it, it's in the bottom of the Takun Chad, and he explains, we saw it on the other page, if you replace it with another animal, both are sanctified because it has kedushat haguf. There's only tmura if it has kedushat haguf. Remember, tmura means you cannot do it. You can't substitute another animal instead, but if you do, they both become sanctified. So that shows it's kedushat haguf if it's a female animal, and it's all based on the fact that a female animal can be brought as an olah ta'of, as an olah of a bird offering. If that's the case, then how could you say here that an olah ha'of isn't sanctified kedushat haguf by its body? It's only sanctified for its financial value. So how could that possibly be? So Amar Rabbi Yossi, ki amtei kahada Amar Rabbi Shmuel b'shem Rabbi Zera. Here he explains, okay, the way Rabbi Zera explains. He says, I'm going to explain it this way. Kol she'ena yichola likarev lo hi v'lo dameha. If you can't sacrifice this item, not it, or not its value, okay, which means that you can't redeem it, okay, because birds can't be redeemed if they get a blemish. It doesn't allow you to redeem. There's no such law of redemption by birds. So it can't be sacrificed and it can't not etzameha lo kidsha ela hekdesh damim. Va'at amart yeot. So he says this can't be done. Ela kedushat haguf, right? And according to what you then therefore you said yeot. You said it well. What you said in the beginning, which is, let's talk about this olah ha'of. This is why the olah ha'of can't be sanctified kedushat haguf. Only financial value. Why? La'akrivo enat yachol. To sacrifice it, you can't do that because what did we say already? Dichti babakar v'lo b'ofot, because only an oaf is bakar. A voluntary oaf offering is with bakar, with cattle, not with birds. Lifdoto enat yachol lefisha ein la'of pidyon. There is no rule of pidyon. So because of that, based on what we said before, lefun kein tzarich me'emar lo kidsha ela kedushat damim. Therefore, we say it's only kedushat damim. So now that was what we have. Until now, we tried to explain. In other words, we explained Rabbi Elazar's position, how he gets it, that these are only sanctified kedushat damim. Now we're going to move on to an opinion that was brought also on the previous page. Right now, we just mentioned Rabbi Shimon about somebody has a female for an ola, which can't be. Okay, we said that it is oset mu'ah. According to this other opinion that came up also before, was that it's Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda b'shem Rabbi Shimon. Okay, that this kind of case is not oset mu'ah. Okay, an ola and a kevala ola is not a tmura. So now he's going to explain. Chavrai b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Rav Aibu bar Nagare Amal. Okay, so the Talmidim, the students of Rabbi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rav Aibu ben Nagri said before Rabbi Ilah b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Ta'ama dahen Tanya. Okay, the reason for this braita is, okay, we're going to show you the reason for this opinion from this braita, from this pasuk. Ve'im kol behemat me'ah asher lo yakrivu mimena korban laHashem. Okay, now this says if you have a behemat me'ah, an impure animal, okay, an impure animal that, okay, we're going to have to figure out what does impure mean. Usually tme'ah means not kosher, but they're going to assume that's not what it means because there's a different verse that talks about non-kosher animals and how they can be redeemed. So this pasuk is a different one that says in Vayikra Kaf Zayin, you can look there 27, it talks about impure animals cannot be redeemed. This is pasuk Kaf Zayin Yud Aleph and Yud Bet. It says Ve'im kol behemat me'ah, I'm sorry, can be redeemed. If you designate an impure animal for a sacrifice, you can redeem it. This one says, right, which seems to indicate redeem without getting a blemish in. This one says, V'im kol behemat me'ah asher lo yakrivu mimena korban laHashem. If you take any impure animal, which again usually means not kosher, but we'll see, maybe it means something else here. V'hemid et habehema lifnei hakohen. So then you stand it up before the kohen. Ve'arich hakohen otah bein tov u'bein ra. He basically evaluates and then you pay the money. This obviously means because you have something that can't go on the altar, it becomes financial, right? Its value is for the temple. So what is he saying? What does this refer to? Matamud lamar tme'ah, right? We don't need that because we already have a different verse that says the be'emot tme'ot can be redeemed. El afilu tme'ah b'oto Hashem. Okay, what does that mean? It means even if it's something that theoretically could go on the altar, but can't right now because there's some issue, like the nikevala ola. So here you have it. A female animal that I designate as an ola can be redeemed without a mum. It's only kedushat damim and not kedushat aguf, which means hareze lo oset tmura. It wouldn't do tmura because only things that are sanctified kedushat aguf does tmura apply to it. Okay, the substitution laws. So here you have. But now they say no, v'kasha, v'haktiv, v'he'emid, v'he'erich. The Mishna in Tmura says that the only time you could do v'he'emid, v'he'erich. Okay, now this is Rabbi Shimon himself. This is his opinion. He'emid, v'he'erich, you stand up the animal and you evaluate it and you can redeem it, is only set for animals that are kedushat haguf. So you can't say that this is the case, that this is referring to this kind of animal. And therefore, this proof doesn't work. Rabbi Zera, b'shem Rabbi Elazar, lo amarkein, he understands this pasuk very differently. He says this verse is teaching something else. Ela ve'im kol be'emat me'ah asher lo yakrivu mimenu korban laHashem. What do we do with this? Kol she'ena ruya likarev lo kan v'lo b'makom acher. Only things that can't be sacrificed here and can't be sacrificed anywhere else, eina oset tmura. Those are things that don't do tmura. But yatzani keva la'ola. This would exclude the case of the ola. This would go back to the original Rabbi Shimon opinion, that not Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda b'shem Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbi Shimon himself, that even though it's not, that this nikevat ha'of can be a tmura because it, even though it can't be brought here, but a female can be brought as an ola, burnt offering, if it were a bird. So there is some way that it does work, and therefore it's not excluded. Therefore, this pasuk isn't referring to that. It's not included in this tme'ah that you can do pidyon without, right? Again, pidyon just means that you can redeem it because it's just its value is sanctified. But this is not. This is more than its value. Its body is sanctified. Kedushat haguf. So we learned the exact opposite from that verse. But comes Rabbi Avin v'Rabbi Bun, ba'avon ba'on kumi Rabbi Zera. They went and got up before Rabbi Zera, and they said to him, but that doesn't make any sense, because here we have an example, Hare HaRoveh. an animal that's sodomized or was sodomized. They can't be sacrificed anywhere. And yet, if you did a tmura on them, it would be effective. So how can you say that tmura is not effective when it's not ra'oi here, not ra'oi anywhere else? Then tmura is not effective. But here, tmura is effective, even though these are not that they can't be used anyway. So they change it and they say, oh, I really meant tmei amamash. In other words, it's a nirba and rovea. Those are animals that theoretically could be brought had they not been sodomized. That's not the same. When I say something that can't be brought, can't be used at all on the altar, I mean like a non-kosher animal. Now that brings us back to square one, because we said this can't be talking about a non-kosher animal, and that's where the Gemara is going to question Rabbi Zera now and say, but Bekashia, Bedakti, Vehemi, Beherich, it already says there that you can redeem that, and therefore you don't need this verse to tell you about non-kosher animals, and therefore we're stuck with Rabbi Zera's interpretation. Doesn't make so much sense. Okay, last Mishna in this parak before we move on to the new chapter, chapter 5. We're now in the 5th Mishnah, Halacha Hey. Once every 30 days, they would adjust prices in the temple. This is interesting, right? Let's say in Israel, for example, they adjust gas prices once a month. Now, this could be a little bit different because here they're going to adjust. They're going to say for this month, all animals are going to cost X. Okay, whatever the price is, right? For different animals, they're going to adjust prices. And then they say like this. So now, prices of the animals might change throughout the month, but whatever they need for the temple, we're going to see here, the temple always wins. Whatever happens, whatever price change is going to go to the advantage of the temple. So let's say it's the beginning of Nisan and we decide sheep are going to go for 50 shekel a sheep. And then, so and it's not just sheep, it's all the, right now we're going to talk specifically about solet. That's fine flour that they use for the mincha offerings. So if they set the price at slatot me'arba, which is you get 4 se'ah, which is a measurement of flour, for a selah, which is a shekel. Amdumi shalosh yisapek me'arba. If the price all of a sudden went to you only get 3 se'ah for a selah, the temple gets to buy it for 4, based on the price they determined at the beginning of that month. Sheyad hekdesh ala elyona. The hekdesh always has the upper hand. Im hitzlias solet. Sorry, I skipped. Mishalosh v'amdu me'arba. Let's say they said it was 3. And then the price went down and it went to 4 for a selah, yisapeg me'arba, then the temple wins, okay? Because it goes by whatever price the temple set, unless it's to their disadvantage. And then again, the temple wins. And this is because sheyada hekdesh ala ta'el yonah. You read that line too early. That line only comes in right now. Sorry, my mistake. Im hitzliya solet, hitzliya lo. Let's say you bought fine flour from someone, and a few days later, it spoiled. It got worms in them. So guess who's responsible? The owner, the person who sold it to you. He has to give you new flour. This would be great in my house, right? If you buy from the fruit store and then a day later they rot, so you can go and say, sorry, they rotted, I need new ones. And if the wine got ruined, right, turned to vinegar, then the owner's responsible. Therefore, you shouldn't pay the money until it actually goes on the altar. But now the Gemara says, Tane b'shem Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon had a different approach here. They bring a braita. They used to give the money right away because they weren't worried, because the kohanim was resuming, they would use it that day already. So there was no concern of anything rotting. With that, and now we're moving on to the 5th chapter. First Mishnah. Now we get to an interesting Mishnah. We get an insight into who worked in the temple and who was in what job. And we're going to see the inner workings of what went on there. There were people who basically were in charge of giving receipts. You would spend money, you would pay money for animals, and you would get a receipt that said, I bought an animal. And then you take it. It's like a token in an arcade or something. You take your token and then you get something for it. Achia ala nesachim. He was in charge of selling the nesachim, the wine and the oil for the libations. Mati ben Shmuel ala payasot. He was in charge of, right, we're getting names of all these people. We're going to have to see who were these people and when did they live. There are a number of generations and a number of different people. So he was in charge of the payas. What's the payas? There was a rotation of kohanim who did what job. So they would do polls, like a lottery, who would get what job. Ptachya ala kinim. Ptachia was in charge of all the pairs of birds. He was in charge. If someone they have to do birds, so he would figure out, and he would take care of selling the birds to people, I guess, and also maybe making sure they were sacrificed. Ptachia zehu Mordechai. Rabbanit, he's really Mordechai, which some people say is Mordechai from the Megillah. Some people say no, it wasn't Mordechai at all. What does he have to do with this? It was a different Mordechai. He would open things up and he would explain things properly, and he knew 70 different languages. They had their own doctor in the temple for the Kohanim who had stomach issues. Okay, we'll talk about this later, right? I was thinking in the army, so there's certain units like Matkal or something where they have their own doctors, okay, right? Everyone knows doctors in the army is quite a troubling issue, but when you're in a high unit, you have extra special care, you get the top doctors. So they had the top doctors, doctors that were in charge specifically of stomach issues. We'll see why they had stomach issues. Nechunya chofer shichin, okay, he would dig ditches. This is for chofer shichin, haya baki b'chafirot shichin, right? He would right. This is for the water. They wanted to dig to get to water so the people, when they came on Aliyah Regel, they would have water to drink. Gvini, Charoz, he was in charge of the announcements. Okay, they would make all sorts of announcements, like, though it's morning, time to bring the Korban Tamid, he would wake up the Kohanim, things like that. Ben Gever, Alni Ilat Sharim, he was in charge of locking the doors and opening them up in the morning. Ben Bave, Bemune al Hapakia, he was in charge, no debate what exactly Pakia is. Some people say it's wicks. Some people say it's lashes, that they would give lashes to people who didn't do their job right or mess something up. Ben Arzayal Tziltzal, on the cymbals. This would be a way to remind the Levi'im it was time to start singing. It's like the sign, like the conductor. Hugras Ben Levi Alashir, he was in charge of the, maybe more, he was more the conductor type. Begarmu al Maaseh Lechem Apanim, he knew how to make the Lechem Apanim. We're going to find some interesting stories about them later. Beit Avtinas al Maaseh Ktoret, they were in charge of the Ktoret, okay, making the incense. Elazar ala Parochet, he was the one who weaved, embroidered the Parochet, the cover. Apparently they would change the Parochet once a year because it would get worn out. Upinchas Hamavish, he was in charge of getting the Kohanim dressed and undressed. Okay, Chov, moving on to the Gemara now. Rabbi Chizkiah Amal, Rabbi Simon v'Rabbanan. Okay, so these different people. Chad Amar, Ksherei dor v'dor balim nota. Ksherei dor v'dor balim nota lehem. Who were these people? So he says these people were the best of the generation. In other words, from all the generations of all the people, they're picking the best of the lot. The Charana Amal, Mishaya b'oto mana masha b'darov. Each one in their own generation talked about the one that was in their generation. In other words, it was the Tana that was living who wrote this Mishna. He wrote the names of the people that were in his generation. It was just a list of right now, this is who's in charge. It wasn't the best of the best. Just this is who it was when he was alive. Some people say, by the way, it's like Paro. Paro was the name of any king of Egypt. So that these became the names of anyone who had that job. It's a bit of an interesting interpretation. So now we have a little bit of a Girsa issue. Okay, we'll read here, but it's a little bit of a problem. Maybe we'll read the Gra. Taman Taninan. Okay, there it says, there's a Mishna that says, this is in Yoma. I'm reading in the Hagahot Gra. Ala Rishonim ne'emar zecher tzadik levarcha. In Yoma, there's a very similar Mishna where it talks about different people that were in the temple. It mentions a few there, and then it says, on these people, it says zecher tzadik levarcha. And then it says, Val elu ne'emal reshaim, shem reshaim yirkav. Okay, and on these people, it said their names should be rotted. Okay, they were terrible people. Now, in that list of terrible people are some of the people mentioned in our Mishnah. Now, it's a bit of an issue. Some of them are the Beit Garmu and the Beit Avtinas, who were in charge of Lechem Apanim and the Ktoret. There's stories about them. I have to remember, I think the stories come up here. I'm sure they come up here. Yeah, we're going to see the story on the next stuff, so I'm not going to even tell you. But we'll see that they were bad, but there was something good about them. So that's going to lead to two possible interpretations. So we want to explain those Mishnayot according to this. So here goes. They say, so if you say, let me just go back to the ground. Manda amak sherei ador vidor balim not alehenu omer zecher tzadik levarcha. In other words, we're going to have to assume there were a bunch of families mentioned here that are also mentioned there, but at the end there was one family that was mentioned at the very end before it said Shem Rishaim Yirkav. So what they're going to say is instead of, okay, there's two Mishnayot. One says these are mentioned well, and these are mentioned not, Shem Kav, they were bad. But maybe they were bad is really referring only to the last on that list. And the ones at the beginning of the list are actually in the side of Zecher Tzadik Lebracha. You'd have to say that because otherwise, what are they doing in our Mishnah if they were these terrible people? That's if you say Ksherei Kol Ador Bali Not. The Manda Amal, Mi Shaya Ba'oto Ador Mana Masha B'doro, Akulam Omer Shem Kav. Then you read that Mishnah referring to all of them, like the Beit Avtinas and the Beit Garmu, that they were Shem Kav. And it was just that they mentioned, it's not that they were great, it's just they mentioned who was in their time, and some of them were bad. So then who was mentioned? Well, the Mishnah before, which mentioned a bunch of other families. Okay, so they're trying to reconcile between the Mishnah in Yoma and the Mishnah here. Amar Rabbi Yonah, Ktiv lachen echalek lo berabim ve'et atzumim yechalek shala. So what's this? He's going to get a lot of reward. Who's this? This is Rabbi Akiva. Sheitkim midrash halachot v'hagadot. If already we're talking about there's some people who were praised because of things they did, we're now mentioning other people not in the time of the temple. Rabbi Akiva who lived during the destruction and after. He taught us midrash halachot and hagadot. Maybe it's a way of saying after the temple, this is what became important instead. No, that wasn't Rabbi Akiva. That was before him. The Anshe Knesset Agdola. Elamati ken zeh. What did Rabbi Akiva do? Klalot upratot, all those laws about klal and prat and how we deal with all those extrapolations on the Torah, all the expounding, that's what Rabbi Akiva did, and that's why he was mentioned as being worthy of respect. Amar Rabbi Aval, Ktiv mishpachot sofrim yoshvei yabetz. And this is a verse from Divrei Yamim, where it talks about these people, Hema Hakinim, okay, there's a list of these people called the Sofrim. Who are the Sofrim yoshvei yabetz? They turn the Torah into numbers. For example, okay, right? These things you shouldn't take truma from. These things are obligated in chala, right? These 5 things. These 15 women, okay, this is, we're going to get to in Yevamot, they're potrot tzarotehen. Their tzarot are no longer chayav in dinei, right? This is all about, I have to remember how this all works. They are, sorry, just blank for a minute. They exempt the second wife. If there's another wife in the family, they exempt them from doing yibum. Okay, there's no people of yibum because the way it works is if it's an issue where there's an arayot, if the brother can't do yibum with her because she's Yisur Arayot to him, she's forbidden for some other reason, then it exempts all the other wives also. Anyway, we're going to get into all those details when we get to Yevamot. We'll see it there. Moving on. Next on the list, 36 kritot b'Torah. There's 36 cases where you get karet. 13 davru ne'amar b'nivelat ha'of tahor. There's the first Mishna in Tarot. There's 13 halachot about the carcass of a dead bird, a kosher bird. Arba'a nizikin. By the way, a lot of these are the first. The 15 nashim is also, I think, the first Mishna in Yevamot. Arba'a nizikin is the first Mishna in Baba Kama. Avot melachot arim chaser echad. Not the first Mishna in Shabbat, but it kind of should have been, right? That how many avot malachot are? Arba'a nizikin is the shor borm of ehever, the 4 basic ideas of nezek, of damages when it comes to a general damages. Okay, how many melachot are there? 39 melachot of Shabbat. So they were the ones who put all these numbers to things. What do numbers do? They help people remember things, right? And help organize them. One of the most important things in halacha we know is being organized about things. Amar Rabbi Acha, Ktiv. It says, Le'ezra kohen sofer. Matu lomar sofer. Why was Ezra called a sofer? Ela kashem shaya sofer b'divrei Torah, kach haya sofer b'divrei chachamim. Just like he was a sofer in divrei Torah, which meant like he dealt with kriyativ and what should be written in the text and what was the right text and what was the masoret, the tradition about the trap, like where to stop, where to take breaks, all that. He was also a sofer in divrei chachamim. He also added these numbers as well. Rabbi Chagai b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. Harishoni. Here's the story about this is about what we call Yeridat HaDorot, the generations getting worse. He says, Harishonim charshu v'zaru v'nikshu kisru adru kitzru imru dashu zaru baru tachanu hirkidu lashu kitvu v'afu. This is all what it takes to make bread. right? They plowed, they planted, they weeded, another type of weeding, they raked, they reaped, they put in piles, they threshed, they winnowed, they separated. Then these are 3 types of separation: sifting. Then they put this water, they brushed on top of the dough, and then they baked. But we have nothing to eat. In other words, the Chachamim did all this work, all the previous generations, but we don't know any Torah anymore. In other words, they prepared everything for us, but we didn't do a good job of passing it down. We're in a bad place. Rabbi Ava bar Zmina b'shem Rabbi Zera, ein havon kadma melachim. If these people were melachim, anan b'nei anash, we're just people. V'in hem b'nei anash, this is a very famous line. If they're people, we actually saw this in another Gemara, anan chamarim, we're just donkeys. Am Rabbi Mana, v'hishata amrin afilu kechamarte de Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair lo admina. Forget about us being donkeys. We're not even as great as the donkey of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. Famous story. What's the story with him? Chamarte to Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, genuvta l'sta'ai balayla. The robbers stole the donkey in the night. Avat tmicha gabon tlata yomin v'lo tama klum. So they gave him food to eat. He wouldn't eat for 3 days. Batar tatel yomin, after 3 days, imchu michazarta. They decided they're going to give it back. Amre. Afkuna min hacha delo temu kaban. We don't want it to die here. It's going to have a terrible stench. Let's get rid of the animal. Let's return him. Afkuna, they let him go. So he went back to his master's home, to the gate. Shariat Mahanka, they heard him neighing. Amar Lom, Pitzchun Lahada Alufta. They said, open the gate for this sad-looking donkey, right? Looking pretty bad. Because he hasn't eaten in 3 days. They brought him in. They opened the door and brought him in. Amar Lom, Yavale Klum Techo. So they said, let's give him something to eat. Yavum kamei se'orim. They gave him se'orim, barley, lo ba'it l'mechal. He wouldn't eat. Amar le Rebbe, lo ba'it l'mechal. They said, Rebbe, he doesn't want to eat. Like I said to Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair. Amar lon, mitaknin inut. He said, are they fixed? Now, usually mitaknin means that they take trumot maschal, but this doesn't really make sense based on the story. Did they tithe the produce? So it must mean, did you take out the bad, like the chaff from it? Maybe he doesn't want to eat it because it has all the bad stuff in it. They said, no, we took it out already. So did you take the demai? And obviously this was stuff they had gotten from Amei Haaretz. And Amei Haaretz are known that they don't necessarily take the masrot from the produce. So maybe you didn't meiser it. So Amrulei, lo ken alfen lebi, didn't you teach us already? Halokech zera lebeima, kemach lo'orot, shemen le'ol, patur min admai. You're allowed to give animal food that's not, even if it's demai, if you didn't take maser, if it's only a suffix, whether they took maslot, you can give it to your animal to eat. You can use flour from there for the hide. They would make the hides for the leather. They would tan the leather using flour and oil for lighting. None of those, you don't need to take the masrot from the demai. So we don't need to. Amarlon, mane bava lahada alufta, dihimachamral grama sagin. Garma sagin. She's very machmir, my donkey. What do you want me to do? Take the masrot and then she'll eat. Okay, so what do you see here? Or he'll eat. You see here that the donkey, right? Ba'arin damyan ba'achlin. So they took the demai, they took it out, they separated the tithes, and the donkey ate. So what do you see here? We're not even at the level of that donkey. Ptachia ala kinim. Now we're going to talk about Ptachia bo re'eh ma gadolu kocho shelo to'ish. Potech dvarim v'dorshan. He would open things up and explain them very well. Yoder b'shivim lashon. He knew 70 languages. So now we're going to talk about why languages are important. Tane, the Braita says, Sanhedrin sheyesh ba shnayim shecholim ledaber b'kulan ruyin lishmo harei ze ruya leSanhedrin. The minimum requirement for Sanhedrin is 2 people can speak all 70 languages, and everyone else at least understands, even if they can't speak. Right? We all know how important it is when you're judging someone that you understand exactly what they're saying. Translators are very problematic. So the judges actually needed to understand. Maybe Shivim Lashon is a bit of an exaggeration, but right, they can really only judge people who they understand what they're saying. Shlosha, if you have 3 people, harei ze benoni, that's already an average, that's better. Arba'ah, harei zo chokhmah, that's already a really good Sanhedrin. Ube Yavna hayuba arba'ah, and in Yavna there were 4 like that. Ben Azai, Ben Zilma, Ben Chachinai, Rabbi Elazar, Ben Matya. Okay, these were the 4 that were great, that knew all these languages and made this great Sanhedrin in Yavna. There was a story where one year everything was dried out and they didn't know where to get the omer from. This is what we have. In the Gemara, we have charades. The first game of charades, maybe ever played, we don't know. But there was a person who couldn't speak, and no one knew where there was Omer because there was a drought and everything was dried out. And here comes this person who couldn't speak, and he put one hand on the roof and another hand on the huts. And they brought Ptachia because they didn't understand, right? Sometimes you signal someone and they have no idea what you're talking about. So he was trying to signal. Amar lehu, eat atar de mitkare gagot srifino srifin gagot. He played charades. He said, oh, he's looking at Gag, he's looking at Srif. Is there a place called Gagot Srifin or Srifin Gagot? And what did he say? So they went there, and what they said, oh yeah, there is a place like that. And they went there and they found it. So what do you see about this Ptachia guy? He was able to understand things that nobody else could understand. Okay, there's a place called Gagot Srifin. It's near Rishon LeZion. That must be the place they were referring to. There was another type of drought. Same story. There was again a person who couldn't speak. One hand on his eyes. And he put one on a suchra. Now, suchra, there's many different interpretations. It's like a secher in modern Hebrew, which is a dam. Is it a grave? Is it the door bolt, like the door jamb where the bolt goes? There's a few different interpretations. Whatever it was, it's something called a suchra. They went to Ptachia to ask. Amarlon, eat atar de mitkare ayin socher or socher ayin. Is there a place called this? And there is a place called ayin socher. Okay, it's near Ariel in the Shomron. They went there and they found the Omer there. So he knew, by the way, this is interesting, right? It's showing someone who couldn't speak, but he obviously knew more than other people. Another story with Ptachia. 3 women brought a pair of birds. What did they mean? So the question is, what kind of sacrifice were they bringing? What did they bring these birds for? Birds could be brought. There were pairs of birds brought for all different reasons. So what happened? Zomer le'enati, sovereign memor. They thought it meant shofat kemayan. Enati is like a spring or a water, water from somewhere. So they thought she meant I'm flowing with blood like a spring, and which means I must be a zava gedola, who has a lot of extra blood. Amar lon, bayana sakant. No, bayana sakant. I was endangered by a spring. And I almost died, and I made a promise that I was going to bring a pair of birds. And that's what it is. It's a voluntary offering, and it's not an offering for a zava. So he basically said, you've got it all wrong. Same thing with all these other 2 cases. Zosha omeret liyamati. So sovereign meimar shofat kayam. Hamati is my water, right? The sea. They thought I'm overflowing with blood like the sea. Again, zava. Amarlon biyama sakan. No, I almost drowned in the water. That's what she meant. Again, same as before. Zoomeret lezivati. Now this really sounds like zava zivati. Sovereign meimar zava mamash. But amarlon ze'ev bali tolapena. Wolf came to try to snatch my son, and she didn't mean what you thought she meant. So again, same thing. She just wanted to bring a voluntary thanks offering with the birds. Ben Achia. So now we're going to talk about him. Why do we need this doctor? I told you we get to the chole me'ayin. The stomach issues, they would walk around barefoot and the floor was cold. They would eat a lot of meat and drink water. Now, most people drank wine with their meat, but they would drink water because they weren't allowed to go drunk into the temple, so they would drink water instead. They would get sick from their job, right? Their job endangered their health, right? That happens. People do certain jobs that do endanger their health. So that's why they need it. He knew which wine that they would drink that would cause them to get better, and which wine they would drink that would cause them to get sicker. So he knew exactly what to give them, what to prescribe, and that's why he was the doctor. Okay, we're going to stop here and pick up tomorrow with after Chag and after Shabbat with the next stuff. Have a Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, or Shavua Tov.